Welcome to the fourth season of Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories. This is Anne-Marie Zanzel, your host, and I am so excited to share some changes to our podcast that are really great, and I think you'll be as excited as I am about it. First of all, we will be dropping a new podcast every other Friday. This is at the request of our listeners who wanted to hear more. Secondly, my producer, Barb Rollinson, will be joining me as a conversation partner as we discuss things coming out. Barb is a fellow late-in lifer and also the mom of a queer kid, and so she has a lot of insight and experience to share with us. And thirdly, we're going to be focusing also on the beyond. Love to hear your coming out stories, but I want to hear the beyond. Sometimes magical things happen when we come out and we have a life that we could have never imagined. Many of us say this is the best thing that we've ever done. So let's get started. Welcome to the show. Tell me your story. I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Amy Vaughn. Amy is an expert in facing fears and overcoming insurmountable obstacles. Through what she thought was the darkest time in her life, she began to wake up to aspects of her life that she didn't know existed. These realizations sparked an utter dismantling of her life, but was also what she needed to begin to rebuild. Her coming out story is intertwined with her coming out of a toxic and abusive church and coming out of a 30-year relationship with her childhood sweetheart. For a time, she was consumed with grief, guilt, and shame, while also grappling with her belief system and her very identity. Now, Amy is a transformational life coach, helping others to face the adversities in their lives and thrive despite them. Welcome, Amy Vaughn.
Well, hello, Anne-Marie. Thanks for doing what you do and inspiring and helping women in their own journeys. It's really powerful, the things that you're doing. So
thank you so much. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today. So I'm going to ask you, tell me your story.
The story. Well, it's so funny when people ask that because it's hard to know exactly where to start. And everybody's, what I've noticed, even from listening to your podcast, is, wow, I can really relate to every woman's story in some aspect. Like, all of our stories are so unique and yet so similar in so many ways. And I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast and seeing the different ways that I can relate to, oh yeah, I felt that, and oh, I went through that. And so that's been a real, that's been so helpful in a lot of ways to stay connected with my own story. But, and my story is really intertwined with my coming out of and leaving a very abusive church. And but I'll say, you know, my background and really what kind of led to where I am now and coming out, you know, I was born and raised in the Midwest, you know, Midwest girl, rural community, super cute, quaint, Norman Rockwell, very white community. And so not only did I not see anyone in the queer community, right. We didn't see any BIPOC people, really. I mean, it was just farmers, and you know, nothing wrong with any of that, but that's just what I knew. And right. So I was a child of divorce, and I was determined when I was a teenager that I would, when I got married, there was no divorce. Like I told myself that was not an option. Right. And so but that divorce, what it did for me as a kid, and you know, my parents did the best that they could, absolutely, yet there was always a sense of not being sure where I belonged, right? Like when I'm here with this set of family, I'm missing out over here. And when I'm over here, I'm missing out. And I never felt quite like I belonged in either. I sort of belonged in both, but not completely. And it was strange. And so that played a part of just kind of the journey moving forward with getting involved in the church that I was a part of for so long. But I had a high school sweetheart, which was really a childhood sweetheart. We started, we went out for 2 weeks in like 6th grade, and that was it. I broke up. I was like, this is not working. And but in high school, he started pursuing again, and I was like, wow, okay. And so in a lot of ways, we had this storybook. I don't want to say a storybook romance. We were teenagers, but we had a storybook story, meaning he was a star athlete. He was the captain of the football team. I was, I was pom-pom girl. It was, rural Midwest story. Like, it's a Hallmark story, right?
Right.
And I always went back to that for decades. Like, we had this special thing. And so there was all of these components of, this is what you do. And I loved my husband. I wanted to get married. I wanted a family. I wanted, I had big dreams, right? We went away to college.
Together?
We started out in 2 different colleges. And then by our 3rd year, we decided to go to the same school. So we both went to the University of Illinois in Champaign, Urbana in Illinois. And so, at that time we had been together for 4 years or so. And, I just said, look, I know you want to get married. I want that too, but we got to find a church. And so we kind of went on this pursuit of finding a church. And, that's a whole story in and of itself that I won't go into, but we found a church.
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Were you raised religiously? And
yes.
Okay. So which with mom or dad, were they the both same faith traditions or different faith traditions?
They both went to church, different places, but I always went to church with my dad and my grandparents. So I would stay overnight at my grandparents every Saturday night, get up, go to church pretty religiously. A few occasions I would go with my mom. Yeah, pretty religiously.
Can I ask you what faith tradition that was?
Yeah, I was raised Baptist.
Okay, so
American Baptist, not
American
Southern Baptist.
Which is American Baptist is a little bit less conservative than the Southern Baptist, middle of the road.
Well, yeah, but they're that's true, but they're stiffer. Do you know what my thought was we were always like, do not speak, do not clap, do not show emotion.
Can I ask you? It's so funny because I know some American Baptist ministers, and I'm wondering if that was more Midwestern. And then,
I wonder.
Yeah, then American, because most American Baptists are right to more progressive that I know. Yeah, but maybe not in Illinois.
Not in this particular church. Like, it was literally a cute little church on a hill out in the middle of nowhere, right. And so, and I enjoyed it most of the time. But I questioned, once I got into college, I started questioning, and I went back to the minister. I'm like, what are the differences? Like, why are we Baptist? Like, what makes us different than everybody else? And honestly, couldn't answer that very well, at least from what I remember. And I started making some decisions of like, okay, God is really important in my life, and I really want to pursue this, but some of this isn't making sense. And then I think I went away to college. I tried finding a church on my own, and then I just decided, you know what, I'm going to take a break. I feel like I need a break. And so I took a break for about a year. But then when my then husband, well, he wasn't a husband then, we were dating, when we were in school together, and I said, look, if you want to marry me, we have to find a church. And because I'm not going to like wrestle the kids every Sunday morning, get them to church while you sit in the sofa watching football. Like that's not going to happen. And so, and his background was religious, although he stopped going to church at the age of 12. But his grandfather was a minister, more like the Wesleyan,
which is conservative as well. Yeah.
So we both had those backgrounds. He didn't have as much of an interest, but I really had an interest in finding community. It was more than having a relationship with God at that point. It was, I need community. I want community. I want church potlucks. And, you know, I wanted that aspect of community. And so, lo and behold, we got involved with the International Churches of Christ. And naive, not knowing anything, got involved, went to church the first time, went to a Bible study group, and there were people of every color, and it was like, this is amazing, right? And so, you know, there were Latinos and Latinas, and there were Black people, there were people from Indonesia. I mean, it was mind-blowing, and they all got along, and that was what really drew us in.
Well, yeah, and you having grown up in a lily white community, it must have been like, it was like water.
It was amazing, and to see how well they got along, and it wasn't an act, right? And went to church, you know, for the first time, and you saw happy families, and you saw the husbands were involved in, like, they sang, they weren't like bumps on a log, or you saw the kids and you were like, they're strangely obedient. You know, they like, what is happening? And it just was it was like, this is it. And then the church spoke about purpose, and they spoke about like a mission. And I was like, yes, I want purpose. Like, I had big dreams. And so all of those things really spoke to me. And we eventually, we went through the membership process, which was studying the Bible, getting baptized, and then, you know, voila, you're, you know, in the kingdom of God. And we were quickly put into like leadership roles.
Right.
More quickly than, you know, I even questioned that. Like we just.
Well, I'm sure, like, so as both of us are experienced church people, I am sure when they saw this nice, attractive young couple come to their church and really embrace everything, they were like, yes, we need these people.
Them.
Yeah.
And yes, that is what happened. And we were told by one of the ministers as he was leaving and a new minister was coming in, he's like, I want to hear good things about you too. Like, it was kind of like, you're going places and I want to hear about it. And I was like, oh,
can I ask you,
somebody? Yeah.
So Church of Christ is known for no music and all that stuff like that.
Traditional.
Yeah.
The traditional Church of Christ.
So were you in the traditional Church of Christ? Okay.
No.
They had music with yours. I was just curious about that fact.
No, so the main line, or the traditional Church of Christ churches, the church that I was a part of was born out of that movement, basically. And the International Churches of Christ started as the Boston movement. I don't know if you have, because you were up in that area. I don't know if you heard about that, but it was a very fast growing church and they expanded very fast. And so it was very exciting.
Right. To be a part of that, I can imagine.
To be a part. And I remember hearing a minister say, like, you know, there are no divorces in our family, in our global family of churches. Like, divorce just doesn't happen because, you know, and I just, as a 20-year-old, not quite yet married, I was like, this, because it met with my determined, like, I will never get divorced mindset already, right? And I just thought, wow, this really is it. Like, this is it. And, you know, my fiance at the time was just as much like in, and we rose. So I don't want to say we rose in the ranks, because we really didn't, but we were raised up as leaders, and soon we're in the ministry, helping with the campus ministry.
Absolutely.
And
yeah, I can imagine that.
Right. Yeah. So, from there, all sorts of things happened, but there were, actually, it's funny, because when we started coming around and studying the Bible, there was a 2020 expose done on the international churches, and they would say, don't watch it, like it's going to hurt your faith, or it's going to be confusing, it's really it's really out there. And I thought, why are they telling me not to, telling me not to watch it makes me really want to watch it. And I did.
Did you watch it?
I did. And
Yeah.
I thought, okay, I believe that these people were hurt so deeply, and that's really awful. And also, my fiance and I would say, like, are we doing the right thing? Like, this is like, there's newspaper article, like there's getting a lot of attention, like, and he just said, it's hard to believe what you read and what you see on TV too. All we can do is look at what we're experiencing. Like, what are we seeing? Are we seeing these things? Are we getting that sense? And we both said, no, we're not seeing that here. It didn't take very long. I mean, there were some warning signs, but you overlooked them. You overlooked them so easily. And after, some time, you started seeing, like, oh, okay, I can see that, that person was mistreated and that was wrong. But it was like, okay, we're dealing with sinful people, like, even who are trying to, they're good people. And I do believe that there's a lot of really amazing, good, wonderful, loving people in the ICOC, the international churches today. But when you're so conditioned, and when you're so indoctrinated, and when you're so, when there's so much fear put into the theological teaching, how can you leave? How can you leave something that, your belief system is, if I leave, I'm going to go to hell, or if I leave, I have no community because I'll be excommunicated. And yes.
Hey listeners, if you're tuned into this podcast episode, I'd say there's a pretty good chance that you, just like Barb, have experienced a catalyst relationship. If your catalyst relationship has ended, we know it can be so very painful.
If that's the case, first of all, big virtual hugs to you, because I know how much it hurts when you break up with your catalyst. It is so hard.
It is. And I know because I have worked with hundreds of women who have had the same experience. If you find yourself struggling to recover from the end of your catalyst relationship, then Barb and I have an opportunity for you that I think you really will love.
That's right. So Anne-Marie and I will be holding an in-person workshop this spring that is exclusively for queer women, non-binary people who need support to recover from the end of their catalyst relationship.
And we're holding this workshop in my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee, from May 16th through 19th. And this is exclusively for people who have had catalyst relationships.
Breaking up is never easy, but there is something uniquely painful about the end of a catalyst relationship that is hard for people who haven't experienced it to understand. And in this small group, and we have room for just 5 participants, everyone who is participating is in the same boat. They've all had catalyst relationships too.
And what's really nice, over the course of the workshop, you can share your story in a safe place, be in the company of people who truly understand what you're going through, and learn tools to help lift yourself up and gain perspective on what you've experienced.
That's right. And we're going to be doing some group work, meditation, exercises, but we're also going to have some fun too.
Of course, you can't come to Nashville and not have fun, right?
That's right.
We are going to go to the world famous Lipstick Lounge, and it's one of the last remaining lesbian bars in the U.S. And we're going to take you downtown for some good old-fashioned honky-tonk fun.
Yeehaw! Well, I can't wait. This is going to be such a blast.
So if you need help getting over the loss of your catalyst relationship, Barb and I encourage you to check out our upcoming workshop.
The link to the workshop information page is in the description for this podcast episode. So just hit the link and you'll learn all about what we're doing. And if you can, please join us.
And if you can't, that's okay. We will have more retreats in the future, and we can add you to our workshop retreat newsletter list.
Join us, make friends, do some healing, have some fun, and be in the company of people who really get you. Just click that link below, and we hope to see you at the workshop.
I think that one of the things, we were just we bought into kind of this mission to help people. And that was really at the core of everything for us. And so as we started seeing things, it was easy then to say, well, gosh, that was not right. But you overlook some of those things.
Right.
And then it happened to us. And then it was like, we were asked to, did you have a question?
Yeah, so when you said when it happened to us, can you talk about that?
Yeah, there were a couple of really big moments, and the second one is like the real big one that made everything change for me. But the first one,
How old were you?
Let's see. So I was 93 when I got baptized. So I was 20 or 21. I got married the next year. In 94, graduated in 95, and then we'd gotten married. We had quickly, soon after, got pregnant and had our first son. And within 3 months of him being born, we were asked to move to Springfield, Illinois, and to help lead what was considered a house church. So it was a very small group of people. It was kind of like a church planting that, they were a small group, 25 people. We were, our brains hadn't even fully developed yet. We were 23, was I 23, 22, something like that. And so, here we are in this new city, leading a group of maybe 25 to 30 people, all older than us, or the same age and decades older. But like we felt so privileged. We felt so good. What had started earlier was that we were struggling financially. The amount that they paid us was not even enough for one person, but that's what they paid us as a couple. And we were really struggling financially. They moved us to Springfield, and we were there for 6 months. And then one day, one of our members called me up. It was a Thursday morning, called me up and said, "Hey, so why didn't you guys tell us that you were leaving?" And I was like, "What do you mean? We're not going anywhere." And she's like, "Well, I heard about it. So-and-so, somebody called me from another church, from the Chicago church. They called me this morning and said, like, oh my gosh, like so-and-so is going to be moved to this other ministry couple is going to be moved to Springfield and like take over." And I said, "Well, that's ridiculous. That's, she must have been mistaken." And she's like, "I don't know. That's what she said." And I just said, "Well, surely they would have told us. And as far as I know, we're here. We're staying here. Don't worry." And we got off the phone, and within the hour, we got the call. "You need to come." We were told, "Come back to Champaign. We need to talk."
So why did they need to talk to you? Had you done something wrong?
Nope. It was, it's sort of a messy story, but it had more to do with the Chicago church had kind of taken over financially the church that we were leading in Springfield, and therefore wanted their own people. You know what I mean? Like they wanted their people. and they never gave any thought to, how do we shift these. We had just moved, we were newly married, we were just in the ministry, we had just had our first baby. We get to Champaign, and the ministry couple there sat us down, and they were like, we are so sorry, like we didn't know that this was happening either, and we can't hire you back because we've just hired somebody else to replace you. And so then it was like, what do we do?
And so there was no consideration that you were a young couple, you just had your first baby, you had uprooted your lives to move somewhere, and nobody thought to tell you.
Nobody thought to tell us. I mean, nobody thought to tell us. We weren't compensated for really anything. So the couple that sat us down said, well, look, there is this church planting that's starting in March, like it's starting actually right now. And if you want, you can be on that team that, goes up there and starts a church. And so it was like, well, what else are we going to do? What else are we going to do? And it was kind of like, well, Madison sounds like a fun city. Let's do it. Like, this will be great. And I remember feeling just so hurt that we were, and by the way, I had just found out that I was pregnant. So I was also pregnant with my second when all of this happened. And I was hurt. I was deeply upset and hurt how it went down, and just how they could just completely neglect a couple who did what they did to be in the ministry and, want with all their heart just to serve God. And so it was so painful.
It sounds like it made you, I would assume, very expendable. Like,
absolutely.
We are just expendable. And
yes.
And can I ask you, at that point, had you received any seminary training or anything like that?
Oh, no.
Oh, no.
No. No. And that was for probably, and this is a wild guess, but I think I'm pretty close. I would say 90 to 95% of all ministry people in the International Churches of Christ are not trained in the seminary.
Mm-hmm.
My then husband did go. I mean, he is a historian by nature. That's what he was going to school for in the first place. And so he very much had a theological mind and a historical mind. And so he did go back to school and get some certificates, like Jewish studies, and at the University of Madison, which had a really incredible program. And that was really life altering in a lot of ways in my own perception of my faith.
Mm-hmm.
But very few people were actually trained.
Mm-hmm.
And they were proud of that.
Well, yeah, that's part of like the low churches, and meaning
yes.
the churches that are not traditional liturgical churches often
right.
are very proud of the fact that people are brought up through the ministry, through the church. And like, so for example, in the Southern Baptist tradition, they will ordain a minister, and sometimes that minister does not have really any theological training at all, and it's just, they've been brought up by reading the Bible, or somebody, and usually in a lot of churches, I'm curious, I would love to hear, I think that would get off track talking about that. So keep going.
That's a whole conversation in and of itself. And it is interesting, but it is one of those things that it's very dangerous. And I felt like, I took it really seriously. I took our roles really seriously because we didn't have that kind of training. But my ex had a very different, his viewpoint was very different. How he viewed the context and how he viewed the history and the culture was so different than what we had been hearing for so many years, right? And so I felt like, I'll just, like you said, this is a whole nother this is a whole nother podcast, just the church story itself. But what happened is we went to Madison, and there was a lot of hurt. And I remember talking to my husband at the time, and he said, it was really shitty what happened. But we're here. We're in a good place. This seems like a really good setup, and we're going to do good things here. And so it was kind of like, we're going to take how hurt we are and we're just going to set it aside because there's a greater mission, there's a greater purpose. And so that was kind of always what was happening, over the course of time. Like, that was really hurtful. Set it aside, glory of God, and like, we have a mission. And so, we were in Madison for 8 years and worked secular jobs. We were not in the ministry. They couldn't, they were not in the ministry. We then were asked to go into the ministry and lead the campus ministry again. And we were struggling. Because we were so not taken care of from Champaign to Springfield to Madison. And when I moved, I was pregnant. I had some complications. Insurance wouldn't cover me because at that point I was a pre-existing condition, and so like mounting bills, never making it, really just by the skin of our teeth always. And that was all we knew. And that's kind of what we told ourselves. Well, this is the ministry. In the ministry, you're not supposed to make a lot of money.
Right.
Interestingly, though, the people that were in the upper echelons of leadership did quite well. They were living in prominent neighborhoods. They were driving prominent cars because they were trying to attract those people, where we were not.
Right.
And so and then at a certain point, the couple who led the church were going to move, and they said, we want you to lead the church. And we went through an interview process. We were hired. And it was then that it was like, okay, we get to do things how we want to do them. Like, we see all of these issues. We hear all of these horrific stories about power over leadership. And now we're in charge, and we don't have to do things, like, we can do things a little bit differently. And because I say that we were low rung leaders, like we were middle management, if that. So in a way, we could slide under the radar and kind of do our own thing while still staying within the context of, the ICOC doctrine. But we could shift and we could expand the thinking about, God isn't an angry God who's just always like, obey me or else. God is a very loving God, and like, we all sin. So let's just help each other. Let's just love each other. Let's just reflect all of these good things, right? And so we had a different way of going about it. Our critical error, but also the best decision we ever made, was when we decided, we asked and asked and asked for training as church leaders and never got it within our churches. And so we decided that we were going to go outside of the ICOC churches to get training. And that was a, big, nasty no-no. But we got buy-in from our lay leaders, our core leadership group. We got buy-in, and it was fantastic. It was some of the best leadership training I'd ever gotten. And we started making some changes to our leadership style even more, and for the freedom of people to really just, well, what do you think God is saying to you? Why do I need to tell you what I think God is saying to you? I don't know. What do you think?
So let me ask you a couple things about the theology of that you existed with. How did they treat queer people?
How do they treat the regular members?
Yeah.
Generally.
Did you have gay members?
Excuse me?
Did you have gay members?
No. Not
out.
Yes, not out. They had a, oh gosh, now I don't remember what they called it. They had a group that was started by a minister who was, well, okay, let me say it this way. Yes, there were gay people who, when they became Christians in the eyes of the ICOC, denied that part of themselves in order to be in a saved relationship with God, which meant they went on to marry traditionally, or not at all. But there was a gay minister who was married, had been married for a long time, said he was very happily married. They had children, and finally got some notice saying, like, look, this exists. But it was kind of like, this exists, and so let's help people, instead of ignoring it, let's help people say, yes, there is such a thing as same-sex attraction, but you can live a right life according to them and according to how they viewed the Bible, and still like love God, not completely deny your identity, but also live traditionally.
So what did you think of all that at that time?
It's interesting because in some ways it did not sit well with me, because I thought, wow, this is not fair. Now, I will say, I had never, up to this point, never considered myself anything. I was straight as could be, and there was nothing in my mind that told me anything different. Looking back, I can see a lot of, right. But there was nothing about at the time that I connected with. And at the same time, I did think, gosh, that's so not fair. That's not fair that these people have to completely deny everything about who they are and like live this straight life. But I also saw it happening. Like I knew several people who did that. They married women, and they had a family, and I thought, well, look, it works for them. Like, okay. And so whenever the subject of, LGBTQ being an ally, I like faded in the background. I'm like, that's fine. You guys talk about that. I'm going to go clean up the kitchen, or I'm going to like be really quiet. I felt really uncomfortable because I knew what I was taught. I knew that it was wrong, right? According to what I was taught. But it didn't make complete sense.
Well, and it sounds like it got to your moral compass a little bit. That you're like, oh my God, these people are asked to give up their lives as complete human beings in a relationship, and pretend they're not gay or not queer,
But at the same time, it was like, but the Bible says right here. But I had I didn't know beyond. I didn't understand. I didn't study. I didn't want to. I didn't concern me. All I knew was, people that I studied the Bible with would say, well, what is your view on homosexuality? And I said, I mean, I think that people should live however they want to live, but the Bible says. So to be a part of this church, the Bible says, and so it was just one of those.
So you realize, I'm sure you know now that that's the clobber passages, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I knew it then towards the end. But as we started, so no, I didn't know anybody gay in any context of my life that I knew was out as a gay person. I was so, what would you say? I mean, confined.
You were in a box.
I was in a little globe of like.
So, and my second question is, how are the women treated in this? Because typically these are very patriarchal churches, and how are you treated as the female minister? Yeah.
Oh, so funny. Not funny, but I remember being a college student, reaching out on campus and inviting people. And I remember saying, oh no, this church isn't like all the others because they treat women so differently. Like they teach about how Jesus had, these women, he lifted them up, he raised, I had this whole spiel like I bought into, because the church would say, well, no, women can't lead, can't speak and teach men, and they can't be like the main leader, but they can lead with their husbands. They can speak on stage if their husband is present. They, but they had like a women's ministry.
Yeah.
So they had women leaders who were leading women, but there was absolutely like no other kind of leadership. So, and my husband at the time was like, that's some bullshit. And so as we started, when we started leading the church, it felt more like a partnership, but there was always the understanding he leads and I'm leading with him, and I have a lot of say, like we would have a lot of conversations about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it, but it was always his final decision or his whatever. If he had sermons, which, I mean, obviously he did a lot of sermons, he would always run them by me because he wanted to know how I, as a woman, as like a regular person in the congregation, would hear it. Like, do these things make sense? He was actually quite brilliant in knowing how to make really complex things in the Bible very simple and easy to understand. And so he was always like, that was a part of our relationship. And so in a way I felt like, okay, I have a voice, even though I didn't. Women felt like second class citizens in a lot of ways. Single women felt very much like,
well, it's also, it always makes me like go, why would I put myself into an environment like that? Like why? Like I did, but it's like now I step back and like, why would I put myself into an environment where I was my work and what I did, because I was in an evangelical church for 10 years. Why is my, is considered second class citizenship,
Yeah. And it's just funny because there was just a mind game in a way that like, no, you can't lead, you can't speak, you can't pray in public, you can't, but you can be an usher, or you can lead in the kids ministry, or you can do this as long as your husband is right there by you, or see how we lift up women. Yeah. I will say in the churches right now, in that particular church, there's a lot of like pushback and a lot of resistance. And but ultimately I believe, and I'm so far removed from it now, but I believe that they had a final kind of decision. No, women can't lead a church. Women can't, they kind of just went back to that. We're going back to where we were. We love you, women. We know you have a lot to offer, but like, stay in your lane. And I felt very much that, stay in your lane. I felt like I had to be the wind beneath his wings. Right. And I did not have a voice.
So when did you start to wake up, Amy?
So I mentioned that we started getting training. We went out to get training, and actually we came up here to where I live now in Minneapolis, which, by the way, I said I never live up in Minneapolis and I love it now, but we came up here and we got training, and the women and the people who led the training were women. And I was like, yes, this is amazing. And they were skilled and they were brilliant, and they could speak. It didn't matter if you were a man or a woman, or at that time, not even, there weren't non-binary people in that group that I know of, but it didn't matter who they talked to, they spoke the same. And it was like eye-opening. And at that time also, my ex he's like, I want you're going to start, like, this sounds kind of authoritative, but he's like, I really want you to start speaking more. So I'm going to do a sermon and I'm going to have you read the Bible passages, which seems like, why is that such a big deal? We got pushback. Like, she shouldn't be reading the word of God in public. And he's like, yeah, no, this is what we're doing. From leadership within our little church. There were just different aspects where he would asked me to lead something, which felt great. But also I was under his, umbrella of authority. And I also needed to be and had to be really submissive to the other men and the other men leaders that we were overseeing, that I had to know my place.
Very complicated.
It was complicated. So I just felt very much like I have something in me. I have something in me and I want to say something. And I feel like a lot of righteous indignation is probably what I would have said. I felt just so much indignation about things, but I had no outlet to speak it in the way that I wanted to. So as our time, so a lot of things happened. Upper echelon leaders found out that we were getting training outside of the church, that we were doing things a little bit differently, still had the same doctrine. In fact, the funniest thing is we met and exceeded all the benchmarks of what they determined was a healthy church. Our attendance was up. People were happy. Giving was way up. People were getting baptized, and not just like the college students. It was, people from all walks of life. There were benchmarks because we were doing things a little bit differently, but too differently. And so for about 8 months, we were in and out of meetings, upper echelon leaders. It was intense and it was brutal. And it felt, my ex would say, he felt like he was shoved into a boxing ring, blindfolded, arms tied behind his back, and was in a ring with 5 other people and just getting the shit kicked out of him. Mm-hmm. And so it was devastating and it was hard. And finally we had one meeting, a couple from another church who were like our superiors, basically said, you guys are exhausted. You've been through so much. This has been a lot. Don't you how would it feel to just maybe go away? Go to another church. And basically we were essentially shuffled out. We were pushed out of our roles. It's not what we wanted. It's not, we raised our family. We had 3, amazing kids who were getting into college, and we raised our kids in Madison, Wisconsin, and that was our life. We loved the city. We loved the state. We gave everything to our life there. And then we were essentially pushed out and said, we've got this other job lined up for you. Oh, by the way, not you, Amy, you're going to have to do your own thing, start a new career, because we can only afford to pay, your husband. And his role was going to be teacher in this other church. And it was a 2-year contract. And by that time we were so beaten, so exhausted that we were like, okay, I guess. And so within the month we had moved. And I was wrecked. Mm-hmm. I was absolutely, utterly wrecked, devastated, crushed. Our family was broken. Our 2 older kids who were in college stayed in Wisconsin. We moved back to Illinois. Our youngest was I just was so worried about him. And I was just devastated. I couldn't get over it. And I remember distinctly, one of the elders came to our house to check up on us, see how we were doing. Very loving, we were friends with this person. I was just in tears, just tears and tears. And he stopped and he's like, he said something like, how are you doing? I'm in tears. And I'm like, I think that I need to see a counselor. I think I need help. And he said, you don't need a counselor. You don't need help. That's why you're here. We're going to take care of you. We're going to shepherd you and take care of you. And you don't need that. And I said, okay. And the funny thing was, he was, and I think still is, a licensed family marriage therapist.
Which is
telling me,
scary, right?
Yeah, but here I knew this person. I trusted him. I knew what he did for a living. And I thought, okay, they're really going to take care of us.
And they didn't. So what I would really like to hear about is your coming out. How did that all come about?
Yeah. So 2 years into this new life, still crushed. still devastated, still angry. And I finally told my ex, I said, I've got to get help. So he agreed. I started coaching. Actually, I wanted a female therapist. I ended up with a male coach who is and was then and still is my coach, and fantastic. And in that time, from about May that I started coaching with him, and for a few months, helping me process what I had lived through as far as the abuse in the churches, in the churches that we were part of. And I started growing, and I started getting more confidence, and I started just flourishing. And so started my school year. I was a teacher at that point. And one day I walked into, it was a normal day, went through my classes. We had a staff meeting. That staff meeting was two speakers who were talking about how we can support our LGBTQ students. Now, I was a first grade teacher. In my mind, I was straight as can be, and I was a first grade teacher, and I was annoyed that I had to sit through this staff meeting.
Yeah.
Because I thought, do you have any idea how much work I have to do? And I'm teaching first grade, and I'm overwhelmed with my life, with my work life, and I'm going to be here for like 5 more hours. Like, I don't want to hear this.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at a certain point telling myself, okay, Amy, stop being an asshole. Like, these two people are like, maybe I can get something out of this. And so I listened, and I thought, I'm going to be respectful, and I'm going to listen. And they were handing out papers. One of the papers was, all of the definitions of the whole LGBTQ. And we're reading them. They asked us to read through them and, talk amongst ourselves about, what we knew, what we didn't know, what questions we had, whatever. And I just remember I was holding this paper, and I was reading the definitions, and I got to lesbian. I knew what a lesbian was. I don't know, but I read, a woman who is attracted to women. And it's not that I didn't know that, right? But something clicked, and I just went, huh.
Oh.
The thing is because there was a woman at work that I didn't understand at the time that I was attracted to, but I would have said I was drawn to. She was a newbie teacher. I was a newbie teacher, but I had a couple years on her, and I took it upon myself to, like, I want to mentor her. I want to help her. I'm going to pop in and see how she's doing. Something clicked in that moment. And I remember looking over at her, and I just remember, and I was reading through the other things, bisexual, because like I'm married, and I'm reading that, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I jumped back up to lesbian, and I thought I call it still, it's a loving term now, but it was my oh shit moment.
Yeah.
Everything
Absolutely.
stopped in that moment. I could hear, it was like the Charlie Brown when adults talk, and it's like all around you. I mean, it was just like I was in a tunnel, and I just kept reading that definition over and over again. And I thought, holy shit, this is going to change everything.
Yeah, you knew right away.
Then I was like, oh my gosh, there's something to this. And so I went home. I called my coach right away. He was like, yeah, normal. It's normal. This happens. And I just was like, but it doesn't happen to me. This doesn't happen to me. Like, I'm the prudy, conservative girl that, was straight and narrow. And I went home, and I told my husband, we need to talk. And he sat down, I showed him the papers, I told him about the meeting, and I said, I think I'm attracted to women. And he said, I know. Ooh. And I said, what now? I said, oh, what? How do you know when I didn't know? And he said, Amy, I've known all along. Right. I've known since before we were married. And I was just floored. I was like, we've been married for, at that point, 24 years. We've never had this conversation that you think I'm attracted, like, what? And so he talked about, he's like, well, remember this, when you told me about this that happened in college. I remember calling him up and I'm like, there's lesbians on my floor, and he was like, well, what do you think about that? And I shut down that conversation. Like, I'm like, don't be gross. Like, I'm just telling you, and he was like, that was a really weird reaction that you had. And he's like, from then on, I kind of knew like there was something there. I had no idea. And there were other things. He's like, remember this, remember that. He's like, you've always done some double takes on women, I've noticed. And I'm like, oh, I guess and I'll say, well, women's bodies are just beautiful. They're beautiful. Like, I was an artist, in my soul, I'm an artist. And so that, that was my, like, well, yes, as an artist, women are
It sounds
beautiful.
So, I recognize, like, our stories are so similar, because I would use this logic of, like, I was attracted to women, but I was also smart enough to know that we're used as advertising tools and we are always represented in art and stuff. So I was able to talk myself, like I would do this, like, oh, I'm attracted to women because it is so featured in media and art. And so, and then and ergo, then I can't be gay.
Right.
I had at least awareness of it and stuff like that. Like, and
yeah.
But I remember when I told my ex-husband that I was gay, his response was, oh, thank God.
Wow.
Because that meant that meant all the problems that were in our marriage were
you.
And it actually wasn't, but could be firmly placed on my queer shoulders.
Very similar story. Yes. And so, the funny thing is prior to that realization moment, as I was, going through my, like, everything that happened to us was horrible and injustice and I started painting again. And I hadn't been painting for 20 years. And the interesting thing, and when I look back now, it's so funny because I did this one painting. It was, I just threw colors on and it was an abstract. And when it was done, I was like, oh, Blurred Vision. That was my title, Blurred Vision. Didn't think anything of it until later. And I was like, Blurred Vision, hello. Vision. Another painting that I did, I have it over here. It was, it's of a woman. I started painting pictures of naked women, basically, but it was an abstract of a woman facing forward. She looks like she's emerging, and she has like her heart. You can see her heart is exposed. And I thought, wow, like that was, and I titled that Becoming, because in my mind at that point, I was becoming, I was coming out of all this hard, messy church stuff. And I was kind of claiming something for myself, but I didn't know yet. Right. And then I started painting some other paintings that, and I realized later after I'd come out, I'm like, I was painting a lot of naked women. Alrighty then. So, but I came out to my husband and he was so supportive, and he said, you have to be who you are fully, and this is who you are. And we're going to work through this. We're going to work through this and figure this out. And I really believed I loved him. We had problems, we had, many things came back to our intimacy and how it was so hard for me. He wanted more, I wanted less, like, and as you know, in the church, it was like, wives, take care of your husbands.
Yeah, submit to your
right
husband. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So but we were committed to working this out. We really wanted to work it out. And we tried really hard, and we, and I also told him that same day, I said, there actually were a couple of gay women in my school. And I said, there's a couple of women I'm kind of attracted to. And he just said, well, get to know them. Like, you don't know anybody who's gay and who's a lesbian. So, like, get to know them, build a friendship, and see what happens. And I said, okay. And so I started kind of pursuing this one particular woman and trying to build a friendship. And I would invite her out, like, let's go lesson plan on Sundays. And I would, tell my husband, he always knew where I was and who I was with. And I would come back and I'd be like, I think I really like her. Like, I think I really like her. And he's like, well, see where it goes. Very open-minded. And I was like, okay. And, and so I did. And at one point I told her, like, look, I know I'm married. I think I'm bi. I don't really know, but like, I like you. And, she was like, well, I like you too, but I knew you were married and I just didn't want to be disrespectful. And so we started having, spending more time together and, telling my husband as far as like, yeah, I really like this person. And he would continue to say like, well, you're not going to know if you're really a lesbian until you really know until you have an experience. And so that developed over time. And what I realized was, oh my God. And I couldn't say the word lesbian at the time. I could say I'm not straight, but I couldn't at the time say that.
Well, that's what with the clients I work with, we start with our denominator is you may not be straight. And that's it, which is very, very normal in the beginning of discovering your sexuality.
Yes. So, I'm going through spiritually, like, what does this mean for me? Like, I'm accepting of gay people, but now I'm one of them. And so now what do I really think? And so I had to go through, I was going through that. And I was already at that point had decided I'm leaving this church. Like, they have abused us enough. I can't do it anymore. And I'm not going to be a part of it. And I had decided we had made a decision that we were going to leave together when his contract was up, which was only like a couple months away. So I was processing coming out of the church and leaving the church and everything I knew for my entire adult life. And then I was starting to understand I'm coming out. But we kept it it was the only people who knew that I wasn't straight was, my husband, the woman that I was seeing, and my coach. And that was it. But then things got really hard in my marriage because as I was understanding more and more, like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm a bisexual. I think I'm full on. I think I'm a lesbian. And my husband at the time was it was almost proud, like, wow, I'm married to a lesbian and she still like loves me and wants to have sex with me. But the reality is like, I don't know. Like, I'm willing to because I love you and because we're committed and because I said I'd never divorce. But I want this less and less and less. And
his response was pretty typical of a lot of guys. A lot of guys respond exactly how your husband did. But the thing is and I hear a patriarchal response because he's like, oh, go and explore. But if you were saying this about a man, like, I think I need to be he would never in a billion years say to you, go and explore, because inherently patriarchal cultures, and especially patriarchal religions, women are less than. So
yes, well, they were seen as property in the Bible. So
so the religion, so a lot of guys say, oh yeah, go and explore. Wife realizes she may not be gay, she may be gay, realizes that she may not want to be married, and that's when the shit hits the fan.
And that's what happened.
So
there was so much of that. And, I still didn't want to get divorced. We were fighting, and it was intense and it was hard and it was painful. And, when he mentioned the D word, it was like, what? Like, we said we were going to work through this. I've given you 30 years. We've been together 30 years. For 30 years, not quite, we didn't start having sex immediately, but, for our entire marriage and some of when we were dating, I've given to you intimately. can you give me some time to figure it out? I was still questioning, like, am I really, like, this is certainly a phase. This has to be a phase. This can't be real. This can't be my life. How am I going to live? How am I going to survive this? All of these things. And, I remember having a conversation with my aunt, who's a coach as well. And, she like, a lot of us talk about, like, if you're wondering if you're a lesbian, if you're staying up late at night, questioning that, chances are really good. Yeah, you're probably a lesbian, right?
Straight girls don't lie awake at night wondering if they're
right.
They just don't.
And so it was just like, oh shoot, this is really something. And the other important thing that she told me was, look, what you're going through is so, leaving this church, leaving, coming out, potentially getting divorced, like, this unraveling and is so life-changing, that for people who go through events that change the way they view themselves and the world and others, and whether it's death, divorce, disease, whatever, it often takes people 3 to 5 years to come full circle to feeling like themselves, not again, but really like living into who they are.
Yeah,
in their new reality.
Yeah.
And I thought, 3 to 5 years, heck no. The overachiever in me was like, maybe 3 years, but we're going to get this down like in 2, and here I am, I'm in, year 4.5, and I'm, finally coming into, very comfortable with who I am, with what I'm doing in my life as a career, in my relationship. And coincidentally, that woman that I spoke about, that I was drawn to, is my partner, and we've been together for 4+ years, and we have an amazing relationship in a way, because realizing that this is a thing, it was one of the, I'm like, this feels so natural, not simply being intimate with another woman, but in every capacity, there were things that just felt so natural to me.
Yeah. And I also remember, like, what blew my mind is it felt like home. And I couldn't, like, I'm like, I have a home. I was getting divorced by that point, but I have a home. I have children. That's my home. And when I was with my wife for the first time, it was like, it just felt like, as you say, very natural and right, and not hard. And I had some worries that, like, I never worried about, like, having sex with another woman, because I was like, sex is sex, I'll figure it out. But I did have some worries about some things, and they all went away within the first night we were together. And it's like, and then as our relationship grew, I realized, like, how much it felt like home. And this was my home to me. And in a lot of ways, it has changed my own definition of home. And it also made me realize that I wasn't straight, and I had never had been, because I always felt just a little off. I wasn't like the other straight mommies, and I couldn't figure out why, but now I realize it's because I was a queer woman trying to live in a straight role.
Yeah. And I think that I feel like I fit the straight role pretty well. Although when I talk to, my partner, she'll be like, no, the first time I saw you, I knew at least you were bi. Like, and I'm like, what gave that away? Like, I was the straightest person I knew. Right. But she was like, it was the way you walked, it was the way that you dressed, it was the way that you carried yourself. I just knew. But I was so oblivious to that. In fact, a year or two, several years before I had my oh shit moment, I remember going through something with my then husband that was really big. And I just remember feeling, I told myself, something is wrong with me. Something is really wrong with me, that I don't really enjoy this. And I remember thinking, if anything were to ever happen to him, I would not marry again. I would never marry a man again. I don't want to have sex with a man again, with a different man. And I, I loved this person deeply. But that aspect was just it. So many things came back to our intimacy, and I just thought something is really, really wrong with me. I really thought, and at the time didn't know and understand what asexual meant. But at the time, I remember thinking I must be asexual because, like, I just don't want this.
And now you realize it was totally,
well,
you were sleeping with the wrong gender for your sexual.
I was with the wrong gender, because even when I told myself that and thought I must be some other label, I knew that I had some desires going on. I knew that I knew that there were things. I'm like, but it can't be. Something wasn't adding up. And so, after it was all said and done, and, we ended up, talking, we sat down, we went through divorce. It happened very quickly. I didn't want it to happen as quickly as it did, but I also didn't want to continue having these really terrible, awful moments being home.
Mm-hmm.
And being with her was always like, it just felt so good and so safe and so normal and so easy. And so we ended up divorcing. It happened super quickly. And because of that, we sat our kids down. We told them that we were getting divorced, but I was not ready to come out to them. And so I said, we can't tell them. I can't do that. Like, I can't. The thought of them rejecting me was so real and so big. And I said, we can't tell them. And so we sat them down and told them, we have
irreconcilable.
Yes, thank you. And we've tried, and we will tell you. We just can't tell you about it right now, but we will tell you later. And it was a really shitty thing to do in a lot of ways, to tell our kids that way. And my youngest actually a couple of years ago said, that was really shitty the way you did that. And I was like, I know it was. I'm so sorry. But within a month, I had gotten to the point that I was ready, and I sat them down, just me, sat them down, and I said, do you want to hear the reason, the biggest reason why, your dad and I are getting divorced or going through the process? And they said yes. And I said, yay. I just still couldn't say it to them, but it was so, it was a really tender moment, because, my youngest at the time was like, well, I figured, like, I thought so because I happened to see a book that you ordered on Amazon. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had ordered, I think it was, Dear John, I'm in Love with Jane.
Yeah.
And he was like, I thought that was maybe my sister's feminist book, but then I read what it was about, and it made me wonder. And I was like, well, you got it. And then my daughter said, well, that makes sense, because we had told the kids, look, it's not infidelity, it's not pornography, it's not gambling, it's none of those biggies. It's this other biggie, but we can't talk about it yet. And she said, you said it wasn't any of these things, and the only other thing I could think of was one of them is gay, and it can't be my dad. And we just all laughed. And I'm like, well, why did you think it was me? And she was like, well, look at you. Like, you've got some purple hair, you've got tattoos, you have a nose ring, like, it's you. And I was like, oh, okay.
Well, it's sort of funny too. And I'm really glad, actually, even though it may have been hard for your children, I always feel like people should separate their divorce from their queerness, because a lot of times when people, tell their kids they're getting divorced and, oh, by the way, I'm gay, it inevitably links the two. And also too, Amy, this isn't yours and your husband's story, your queerness. It's your story. And so I think it's really, really important for them to have heard the story without him present, just you by yourself, Because it has not, your queerness has nothing to do with your husband. Nothing.
That's true.
And so even though it was not, I mean, I don't think it was as shitty as you think it was, actually. I think it was really great that you told your children by yourself. You didn't do it in the same sitting, and it gave them a couple of weeks or months to process the divorce before they heard the quote unquote reason, And so I have to start wrapping this up. And
of course.
So,
we've been going for a little while.
Yeah, we have been going for a little while. And so I would love to hear, did you have a coming out song? Did you have something that took you through that time?
I had several songs that were, I would not have labeled them my actual, the coming out as a lesbian song, but they were more of my liberation from everything song. And that was two of Joss Stone's,
I love
Free Me.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other one? Something about being wrong. I could be wrong, or now I can't remember what it was actually called. But two of her songs were songs that I played every day. And they really meant a lot to me, and they got me through. Because it was I have a right to be wrong, something like that. I have a right to do this. I might be wrong, I might not. And this was not necessarily about my queerness. It was just about leaving the church, getting divorced, completely gutting my entire life as I knew it.
Yes.
And I might be wrong about some of these things. And you know what? I got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And the Free Me was just I have to be free to finally speak my truth, to be finally visible, not as the wind beneath his wings, or playing second fiddle, or being the best supporting actress in my own life, but I am free to be me, to be the actress in my life, the lead in all of these ways. And so those were the songs that I just listened to daily.
And did you have any books or movies that not really so much about your coming out, but really change your perspective of things?
I don't know if there were any specific movies. I remember at some point watching the movie Carol.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was look at this woman, she is powerful. She knows what she wants. There's, and seeing myself in both of the women. Both of the
roles, right?
Right. Both of those roles. I was I see that. I can see that. So that was, that was eye-opening to finally see roles like that being played in a movie. And then I think as far as books, there was the book, it was about coming out as and homosexual, and it was from a religious perspective. And I wish I could remember the name of that. I'd have to get that to you for your show notes maybe, but that book was really helpful. In fact, my ex is the one who's you should read this book. And that really helped me because it tied in with what he had already been teaching, in our church, because we did have a gay couple that were attending, and it ruffled feathers and whatnot, and so we were already having conversations about what that word means from the Bible, and how it's mistranslated and misused, and culturally what was going on at the time, and all of these aspects of that. But the book was just one of those okay, it's in writing, and I'm not just hearing it from my husband.
Yeah, your husband,
reading
right?
it. I'm reading it, and it just absorbed it. And I apologize, I don't have the name of that book on the top of my head, but that was a big one. And then the other one is one that I always keep on my desk. It's actually written by my coach. It's called The 7 Secrets to Enlightened Happiness. And that was just a really deep, rich, like you read a little bit at a time, and it was one of those like, whoa, this is just helping me know who I am and figure out what it is I want for my life, and how to be really happy in a different kind of way. So those were the things that came.
How would you describe your life now?
Amazing. I think free, liberated, powerful. I have an amazing relationship with this person who, we're very different in a lot of ways. We have a pretty big age difference. And we are both, in a way, coming into our own at the same time at different stages of our life, but doing it together. And it's amazing. And I've had more support than I ever would have imagined. It shocked me. The support that I have from my family, the friends that I came out to were supportive. I had my best friend that I would have thought, it's like, what is it? Thelma and Louise. Like we were going to be that. Told her, she seemed to be really accepting, and then disappeared.
Yeah.
And other than that, though, the support has been amazing. And so it's like, I just get to be me. I just get to discover me, figure it out, live, help people along the way, and just enjoy my life.
Congratulations. That's a huge achievement.
Thank you.
And I know you do that work with helping other people do that same. And we'll have all the contact information for Amy at the end of the show notes. Amy, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with me today. It's been wonderful to have you on the show.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.